Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, welcome to yet another live interview right here on Tejano Keyboard. Today, first of all, I am Rolando Revilla Jr., right here for TejanoKeyboard.com. Today, I'm wearing my Detroit Tigers t-shirt that my wife got me. I'm not really into sports, but if I had to pick a sport that I do enjoy, I would say it's baseball. So, and I'm a native of Michigan, even though I live in Ohio. So, root for the home team, I guess. Whatever. I don't really pay attention. And people are like, "Oh, did you hear that so-and-so got traded?" I don't keep up with sports, but that's neither here nor there. That's not what we're here to talk about. Today's guest, I'm so super excited to have. We have Mr. Hector Gutierrez. Hector, how are you doing?
How's it going, Rolando? Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Hector, he's a producer, arranger, keyboardist, solo artist, etc., etc., etc. He's played with everybody from Gary Hobbs to David Lee Garza and everybody in between. So thank you for making time to join us here today. We were talking a little bit before we went on the air, just kind of like getting familiar with each other, because although I've followed his career over the years, we haven't really formally met. So this is kind of like a first time sort of thing. And so right now, as we were talking, you're kind of doing like a solo project, right? You kind of do like a one-man band sort of entertainment sort of project.
Yes, yeah, that's what I do now. Back in 2005, they came out with since you're a keyboard as well, a keyboardist, you're familiar with Roland, and I purchased a keyboard. It's called a Roland Phantom X6, and I was really impressed with this keyboard, and it was a hard drive. Keyboards before that, you could produce music on it, but they used a floppy disk.
Yep.
And you could only store just maybe one or two songs on it. But this keyboard was a hard drive, and you could actually store several songs on it. So once I purchased it, I said, "Hey, man, you know what? This is something that I could kind of work with, put stuff together myself, and I can go do little solo acts by myself." Mm-hmm. And I first started doing a jazz gig in Galveston that every Sunday. It was jazz night, and I was just playing instrumental stuff. But now I have all kind of music in my repertoire: Tejano, cumbias, jazz, rock, whatever. I do all kind of stuff now too. So it's a lot of fun.
And before we went on the air, he had this great line. He goes, "I always tell people that I play anything from Frank Sinatra to Ramon Ayala." I like that line.
Because people ask me, they'll say, "Oh." Or like if I go set up to play somewhere and I'm getting ready, "Hey, what time where's the band?" I said, "I am the band." "What kind of music do you play?" And so, and then I just tell, "Hey, man, I play everything from Frank Sinatra to Ramon Ayala." That's what I tell them.
So Hector, let's rewind a little bit, if you don't mind. Let's talk about your beginnings. How did you get involved in playing keyboards? What inspired you to take on this instrument? How did you get your love for playing keys?
Well, originally I'm a percussionist. I'm a drummer. I studied drums when I was a kid, and all through elementary, junior high, high school, college, I was a drummer. But as you well know, in the percussion instrument, you have the marimba or xylophone that's played with mallets. So I studied all my scales while I was in school, And the marimba is the same thing as a piano.
Right.
You have, there are bars, but it's the same thing as the keyboard. So all I did was transfer what I knew playing with mallets to playing with my fingers.
Yep.
So it was just a normal progression there. And I'm actually, well, I studied music with percussion, but I'm self-taught with the keyboard.
Right.
But I
Right.
mean, I studied a lot of my own, and I studied a lot of artists and a lot of books. And in college, also, it helps music theory and stuff like that. So,
And most of the time when you go
um,
to college and you take any kind of music, if you're going to major in whatever instrument, even if it's percussion, even if it's vocal, they always have you minor in piano because piano is kind of
hmm
like where you get all of your theory. It's kind of like the what I call the gateway instrument to everything else, and
yes.
so yeah, that's very interesting. Now, when you used to play mallet percussion, right? You said marimba. Did you play anything else? Because I
hmm
know like some jazz guys like really get into vibes, and you can get that sort of like
Yeah,
rolling, sort of like chorusy sort of sound, that tremolo sort of sound, that real nice warm buttery
right.
sort of sound from playing vibes. So you played
Yes.
vibes as well.
Well, yeah, in high school, we had a jazz band because I went to, I graduated from Robstown, Texas, and close to Corpus. And they never had a jazz band. I graduated in the mid 76.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, the high school really never had a jazz band.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate that when I was in high school there, we were able to form a jazz band. And that's when I actually started playing the piano also in the jazz band. And we had a vibraphone. And I would play the vibraphone also on some of the numbers.
Awesome, awesome. I
Yeah.
want to send a couple quick shout outs here. We got some people here. We got Anthony Ibarra says, awesome. Love the taste you put on them Gary Hobbs albums. So
Thank you.
Anthony wants to, you know, uh, let you know that he liked those albums. Also, shout out going out to Chris Drunk, who's watching all the way from Pontiac, Michigan area. Also, John Ortiz, all the way from Holland, tuning in and watching us. Thank you guys very much, and be sure to keep those questions and comments coming in, and we'll try to get to them in a timely fashion. So Hector, you went from playing in school, right? How did that transition
hmm
over to the whole onda chicana Tejano music sort of thing? Because I mean, those are two completely different worlds. What was kind of the gateway that got you from mallet percussionist to keyboardist?
Well, actually, when I was a kid, I used to go from Robstown to Corpus with my dad, and he used to put the radio on. But my dad used to like to listen to Los Rancheritos de Topo Chico and Los Alegres de Terán
Yep,
y Los Relámpagos del Norte. And all
absolutely.
that was great. But when I was a kid, oh man, I was like, oh, Dad, turn that junk off. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear it. But anyway, uh, but then all of a sudden the day came when I heard a band called the Latin Breed and the World Jesters,
Yep.
and they put a different twist on the polka,
Yeah, and rancheras and
on
cumbias.
the rancheras,
Yep.
right? So that's what got me hooked into it. And then we formed a band. A friend of mine, I don't know if he's listening, David Hernandez. Uh, we started a band in Robstown. We were called Cielo, and this was during the time when it was still called Chicano music. The
Right.
word Tejano didn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
but we were from a time where we actually started jazzing up La Onda,
Yep.
you know, and so it was a lot of fun because that's really from my background from jazz and I like to listen to Stevie Wonder and Chicago and Earth, Wind and Fire and all that. So all of those influences, we started incorporating them into La Ranchera.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of that bridge that you're talking about right there. How
Yep.
that happened.
And so then and so when you started a band, naturally somebody needed to play keyboards, and so you were the person that was kind of best suited for that position, or did you start off playing
Yeah,
something else?
I started with the keyboard. I kind of left. I haven't played drums in a long time. Oh man, I don't know, really since my early 20s that I haven't played drums at all. So once I picked up the keyboards, that's all I've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, well back then, I had a Fender Rhodes and I had this. It was called ARP. The
Yeah.
company was called ARP. I don't know if you remember
Yep.
ARP.
The,
And I had a keyboard called the ARP Quartet, and it had strings, organ, brass, and piano, just four sounds. But I used that for my strings, so Fender Rhodes strings, and then a Moog Prodigy.
mm-hmm. And,
So that was kind of the same basic setup that Moss had. It
right.
was a Fender Rhodes with the strings and a Moog.
Yep.
So that was the onda back then.
Yeah. And there's much to be said about that because, like, nowadays keyboards have, I mean, thousands of patches and like so many
Oh
different
yeah.
sounds, right? But when you really think about it, like when you're talking about old school onda tejana or onda chicana, you're talking about a basic set of sounds. Your electric piano for your chords, your strings, a brass sound, a synth sound, and maybe some kind of like organ or bells and stuff. So it's interesting that, like, even back then with the four sounds that the ARP had, that's really basically, I mean, it's almost come like full circle. Like that's still what we use these days, albeit the technology has probably advanced and the sound a little better, or and even that's kind of arguable, right? Because there's a certain aesthetic to the old school original sounds. I mean, people through all these digital synthesizers, everybody's trying to emulate the Fender Rhodes again. You know what I mean? And that's
hmm
what I mean. And that was the real McCoy, and that's what I mean. But anyways,
But speaking of that, speaking of that, I know like the standard, like you say, a lot of groups they use the standard piano, strings, brass, whatever in their songs. But I started to, since like you said, the technology was getting better. Uh, with Gary Hobbs, there's an album that I recorded with him about I don't know 5 6 years ago, and the name of the album is Eternamente.
hmm
And the idea that we had for that album was to go beyond your normal piano, strings, and brass.
hmm
So if people listen to that album Eternamente, you listen to some of the songs, you'll hear different textures in these songs. It's not just your normal sounds. There's some effects, sound effects that I use, or certain sounds that are out of the box, what you normally consider to be Tejano. Some of the sounds there, because when you hear a keyboard, and as you know yourself, you go to a store and you say, oh, well, look at this keyboard. So you start listening to it, and it's got all kind of sounds in it, right? It's got all kind of sounds.
hmm
But then again, the Tejano artist tends to use the same ones. Well, then I decided I'm going to go out of that box. I'm going to use what about these sounds? So I started using these other freaky sounds.
hmm
So if you listen to the Eternamente album, you'll hear other sounds that are not normally used.
And you know what? Even to go further back, I mean, well, I guess we're kind of jumping in timelines here, right? But
Mm,
so for those of you who are not aware, Hector was one of the forces behind the 1392 album De Ligarse los Musicales. He did some arranging for that and producing, I'm
Silver
assuming, and
edition.
the
The
Silver
silver
Edition
edition also.
también.
Hmm
But specifically, the 1392 album, I noticed that the piano sounds that you were using were different from what everyone else was using, right? Because everybody was using like a Korg, sort of like, you know, the typical, I don't know, like a DX7 copy basically, but with effects
hmm
and stuff. But the sound that you had, it was interesting because you could even play it in a different octave. Like, the voicing seemed to be like it was like an octave higher than from what everyone else was doing, but it fit so well with what was going on, with all the other textures that were going on. Am I incorrect in my assessment there, or is that
No,
so?
you're right. You're right.
You know,
Well, I guess since you have an ear, you have a good ear of listening. Uh, Keyboard players, of course, everybody plays different,
mm,
and everybody has a different way of accompanying a song.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as me, I use both hands. You know, when I'm gonna fill in with pianos, I mean, I'll fill in with both hands and I'll create a full sound on, as opposed to just playing with one hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which some keyboard players, they maybe just tend to fill in with the piano, but they only play with one hand. But when you play the octave, like you said, you hear a higher octave. Well, that's actually right because I'm playing a lower octave and I'm playing a high octave,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm getting a full range of the sound
Yeah.
when you
So
do
are you
that.
doing like basically two hands unison, or are you playing like full chord extensions where you might be playing like say the root, the fifth, the dominant seventh in one hand, and then like the upper extensions in the other?
I don't play the root. I don't play the bass note for those people that are listening that maybe know something or don't know anything about music. In a band, you have a bass player.
Mm-hmm.
Let the bass player play the bass.
Mm-hmm.
I stay away from bass notes.
Mm-hmm.
That's immaterial. You don't need that. That's a useless. It's useless. The
Mm-hmm.
bass is playing that. You don't need to play that.
Mm-hmm.
I play nothing but the meat of the chord.
Mm-hmm.
I could be doing one inversion here and then another inversion up here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same chord but two different inversions.
Right. And like I did some kind of classical studying, and I know that there's certain rules like within classical composition that uh like stay away from parallel fifths and parallel octaves and stuff like that. But one thing that I remember that my professor was telling me is like, you can play all these notes in a chord, you know what I mean? Right? Or sorry, but then he says you only need one third, and that'll let you know if it's minor or if it's major. And and
Right.
and so that stuck with me. But the one thing that as far as from my perspective, is that I like the richness of the third. So to me, I always try to double the third, even though I guess by classical composition standards that's incorrect, right? But by having more of the third, more of the seventh, like the colored tones of the chord, that makes the chord sound more rich. And so, for those of you who are watching and wondering what like a cordless voicing sound, or I'm sorry, a rootless voicing, what that sounds like. So, for example, if you're gonna play an A minor seventh, right? The way I typically play an A minor seventh, and maybe Hector does it the same way, is basically I play an inverted C triad. So to me,
Hmm.
that's A minor because the bass player is already playing that note. And you see, to
Right.
me, it starts to sound too rich, especially because like it's not classical music, it's Tejano music, it's amplified, it's like rock and roll. If the bass is already loud and hitting that A, and you're doubling that A, playing, that's too much of one sound, at least to me.
Right.
So by just
Well,
playing the C and letting the bass player play that, it just kind of like opens up some space, in the frequency spectrum to, so it's not so muddied. Is that kind of like what
that
you're talking about?
that's exactly it. Let the bass player play the bass, and you just play the meat of the chord.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes when I do two different inversions, I might not play the same inversion, or as far as complete. Like on the bottom part, I might omit because that's what in musical terms that there's what we call omits when you omit the third or omit the fifth, or whatever. So if I'm going to play a chord, I might omit the third down here, but I'll play the third up here.
Mm-hmm.
And down here, I might use a chord that's more spread open, not so close together. Down here is spread open, and up here will be a cluster closer together.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then sometimes I might do it the other way. I might play something close down here and play something more spread up here
Mm-hmm. But
at
it's
any given time. That's just improvising
mm-hmm.
with, like say when I go play with Gary, because I've gone to Monterrey and stuff with Gary here about the last couple of years. And you're playing the songs, whatever songs they are, and you just, you play your leads, but then when it comes down where he's singing and you're just accompanying on the piano, then it's just an improvisation at
Mm-hmm.
that point. It's
Yeah.
just improvising, playing the different chords, filling in, and just being just whatever comes to mind at the time.
Yeah, and the other thing too, it's about creating textures, right? Because like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes you want a closed voicing and something up on top that's more spread out to kind of like leave some space in the middle for the vocals, right? Because you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to like kind of step where the vocal range is, right? But other times the chord might be completely spread out where you're playing,
Yeah.
like a seventh.
Sometimes I'll play a spread here and a spread on top, both
Yep.
spreads, and then you get a full range of the
Yeah,
chord.
something like a big, like this is technically, I guess, C9, 13, like a major, like it's a 6/9. But anyways, all the spaces in
Hmm.
between them are fourths, with the exception of
Right.
at the top.
There you
No, no,
go.
no, it's all fourths. So
There you
so
go.
that's
Yeah,
kind of like
that's
the
it.
voicing that a lot of Chicano guitar players use when they're accompanying. That's kind of like their go-to shape for primera, or whatever you want to call it, first.
Hmm.
you know um
And sometimes it could be just quick. It
yep.
doesn't have to be where it doesn't have to be where you lay on that chord that long. It could be just passing through it. Dun, dun, and then you move on to something else.
Mhm.
So it's always a continuity of what you're creating.
Yeah, and I noticed that even a lot of those like chord voicings and the choices of the of voicings are very apparent in like the work that you did, especially like in the Un Momento album with Gary,
Hmm. Yes.
because that song, like, it starts in D, but then modulates to
Un,
C before the Un Momento,
un
right?
moment, un momento.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it hits a A11. Boom.
Oh yeah, so
Ba-da-da.
something like that, right?
Right, and then right before it comes singing, then you hit a G11, boom, and then you go, and then he starts singing in C. Right, right,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
what?
And so that type of arranging back then, I guess you could say, kind of maybe not too many groups were maybe using that type of arranging back then. It was more straight ahead.
Yeah.
So I kind of just decided to uh, push the envelope and just be a little more creative and
But
use my.
and I think that's the thing, is that there's some arrangers that can tastefully bring something from the outside in and still make it palatable to the masses. You know what I mean? To me, I think one person who was very successful at doing that sort of work, at least in my opinion, right, was Jerry De La Rosa, who was able to
Hmm.
get something, like a progressive idea of some sort, or even like yourself, you get like that idea, right, and like, hey, let's start in D and then switch to C, because
Yeah.
like, uh, to me, I thought, and this is just from like what's the word I'm looking for? Like a music appreciation sort of standpoint, right? Like, you start in D and D sounds bright. But then you switch to C and C feels dark, even though it's not, right? It feels dark because you've moved down a whole step. But um I that's not the intended effect. The intended effect is that after the chorus, the music comes back in and it goes back up to D. So it's kind
It
of
goes
like
back
it
up to
it
D.
brings you back up. So it has like a feeling of uplifting. You know what I mean? Because if you're
Right.
da 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 or da 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 or whatever, da 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 whatever, then you go ba da ba da
Yeah.
da da, and then
Right.
so now it
Yeah.
feels
You
like it
see it.
goes up.
And those that type of arranging, like I said, was uh, different for the times. I mean, that was like a new standard of Tejano,
Yep.
if you could say, new style of arranging.
Mm-hmm.
So, cause not like I said, nobody before that. It was a lot of traditional, just your basic ranchera, right?
Primera,
You know, your
segunda,
basic
and
primera,
tercera.
segunda, tercera, and which that's fine, you know, because you can be creative within those notes.
Right.
But yet to do stuff like that, that was just a little more jazzy, if you want to say, or
Yeah. More
which is
progressive.
what I did
Yeah.
because I tried to use what I was learning about music, just incorporating it into Tejano.
Mm.
You know, I mean, I'm learning this stuff for something. I might as well put it to use. You
That's
know,
a good one. I
you know
like that.
why am I learning this stuff and then I'm gonna go play Tejano and just do da 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 with two fingers? You know what I mean? I'm not gonna do that.
Hey, speaking of
So,
two fingers, we're gonna interrupt here. Queremos enviar un saludo going out to un buen amigo, Chris Rodriguez from Tejano Highway 281.
hey, ¿qué pasó, Chris?
He says, "Hell, I just play with two fingers." LOL. Saludos, Hector and Rolando. So there you
Hey,
go. That was.
Chris is an excellent keyboard player,
He is.
accordion player.
He's great,
Chris is
man.
an excellent musician.
Bass, drums, anything you put him on, man. He's excellent. He's a great musician.
Yeah.
John Ortiz, I think, was talking about when we were talking about like chords and playing chords with two hands. He says that he plays in unison at times. I mean, and that's fine too, because like sometimes instead of like trying to layer the piano to be like dark and bright, you can just create the sound, and then you can kind of take away that one hand to kind of make it dark,
Hmm.
or the other hand to make it
Yeah.
bright, or so there's practical purposes for doing that. But but as far as what you were talking about, we're talking about chord extensions and trying to making them big and
Yeah.
hit different voices with as many reaches as possible.
Yeah.
uh,
And for musicians out there listening, this is just what I've done, and it's something that you can do also. But as musicians, we have to appreciate all kind of music. We can't say, because there are a lot of groups. If you go hear a country band, they're just going to play country music.
mm,
If you go see a rock band, all they're going to play is rock. And maybe you talk to some of these musicians, and that's what they're set on. And I mean, that's fine. But that's one thing I like to say maybe about Los Hispanos is that we do everything. We don't just stick to one genre. We kind of touch on all bases.
yeah.
But one thing I love to listen to classical music, symphony music, Beethoven, Chopin,
Yep.
Tchaikovsky.
Bach. Yep.
Now, a lot of my influences, believe it or not, talking about the Un Momento album, I got a lot of my ideas from the Un Momento album from symphony. There's another song on that album. It's called Quiero Ser Tu Amor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's da 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 da. That's the little melody line on it, the lead. Now I got that from listening to symphony. I don't know who it was. I had it on the radio in the car, and there was a symphony piece playing, and there was a line in it where it went da 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 da, like on the strings, the violins and the cellos, and da 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 da, and it was just so. I felt that so strong, and I said, "Hey man, that sounds cool." So I kept that, and I kept it on my mind. So I changed it to da 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 da. I converted it from
Yeah.
just that little riff
Mhm.
and that little line from that whole piece, that whole masterpiece that they were playing. Just that one little line, it inspired me, and then that became the intro to Quiero Ser Tu Amor.
And here's the interesting thing is that like, and for whatever reason, that whole album is a perfect it's like the epitome of what we're talking about, because one of my favorite tunes, probably if not my favorite tune from that album, is Te Voy a Enseñar, right? Is that the name of the tune?
Te voy a enseñar a querer.
Yeah, Te Voy a Enseñar a Querer. Okay, so that tune, remember we were talking about, hey, there's some cats who just do primera and segunda, and that's perfectly fine, but what you do with primera and segunda, and for those of you who are in the number system, the 1 and the 5, right? Because music breaks down to 1 and 5, and it goes to 4, right? But if you break that song down to its like simplest form, there wasn't a lot of like there was stuff that you put in, I feel, that kind of doctored it up, because if you take the tune of Te voy a enseñar a querer,
Hmm.
but throwing in a few other like changes, the preparation to go from the G to the A minor to the D, like those are little chords that you throw in here and there. And even if you take the chorus, right, if you were to just take it from the 2-5-1 to A minor D 7 G, te voy a enseñar a querer a vivir a sentir mi cariño, right there, and you could just wait and then go back to the A minor, but that little diminished sort of arpeggio sort of thing.
Right.
And right there too, you were talking about sounds. That was it was like a kind of like a some kind of like synth, like not a pan flute. It was something different that wasn't like a typical, like your typical Tejano sounding. What sound was that?
I used sounds back then. There was a keyboard. It was a Super JX10.
By Roland.
I love by Roland.
Yep.
Super JX10,
Yep.
the 76 key.
Mm-hmm.
And man, I used to love that keyboard. Uh, I use that on the recording. I use a lot of sounds from, but I don't even know if you can even find that keyboard anymore. I've never seen, you see still M1s and you see O&Ws and stuff,
DX
the
sevens.
D50s,
Yeah,
but I
D50s.
haven't seen anybody with a Super JX10.
And I'm not trying to plug this company because, like, I mean, whatever. I've only seen them on the internet, right? But there's a company out of San Antonio called Cintar. Is that the name of the company? Cintar.
I've
Uh,
never heard of it.
yeah. Eddie Pettis, the producer out of San Antonio, he works there, and they do like old synthesizer restorations. Like they've gotten some of the original Junos and like rebuilt them, and have done paint jobs to them, kind of like that show that Pimp My Ride, but they would do Pimp My
Yeah.
Keyboard, and they would add all sorts of stuff. The Because Roland was really well known for their Dimension chorus, right? And so that
Hmm.
chorus module that they had, like in the MKS 20 and all that stuff, that they actually had that same technology in one of the Junos, and they actually put an input jack in the back of it, so you could actually use the chorus that was in the Roland through the circuitry. So you could plug in a guitar or whatever that you wanted chorus, and it would travel through the audio of the keyboard and come out the other end, with chorus or whatever effects. But perhaps they might, I'm gonna have to look at their website and check out their YouTube channel, because they do these restoration videos, and they show, like, they drop off these keyboards to clients and stuff. But I'm sure, man, that they probably would have one of those Super JX. What was it again?
Super JX10.
Super JX10. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
But but also that was a long time ago, the Un Momento album that sometimes I can't even remember. I really can't even remember what sounds I was using back then,
Right. Right.
it's been so long.
Yeah.
But that is, I mean, that album, uh if if you look on YouTube, there's this if you go to YouTube and look up Tejano Hitmakers,
Hmm.
there's an interview. This guy, I don't know if you know
Jorge
him, Jorge
Flores.
Flores.
Yeah.
You know Jorge Flores?
Yeah,
Okay,
from Graphic
he was
Studio.
he,
Hmm.
yeah, he was gonna put a documentary together,
Hmm.
and he was gonna interview like all kind of people from Tejano and get their stories and stuff. So I was the first one that he interviewed, but I don't ever think he finished that documentary. But if you go to Tejano Hitmakers, you'll see an interview that I did with him.
I remember
And
that.
I talk about Bob Griever. Bob Griever used to be he was the owner of Cara Records,
Hmm.
which Mas was under that label in La
And La
Mafia.
Mafia. Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, and at that time we had recorded the Un Momento album, and I tell the story how I was at a club back then, and Bob Griever was there. I knew who he was, but
Hmm.
I was surprised that he knew who I was. He came up to me and he said, "Hey, you Hector?" I said, "Yeah." I said, and he congratulated me on the work of the Un Momento album, even though it wasn't on his label. It was
Right.
under SG Luis Silva.
Yep.
But so I was very flattered that he noticed that, So yeah, back then the Un Momento album it did well. They did well back in the day.
And Bob Griever was one of those guys, may he rest in peace, who just had an excellent ear for great, like, for hits, man. Like, he would. I had heard, or maybe I saw in an interview that they had with him before he passed, where he was like, "Man, I would just buy up songs, and then I would already have them kind of like in a catalog, and say, hey, this song works for you, or this song works for that person,' and they
Mhm.
would record them, and they would be like massive hits, man.
Yeah.
But
One thing he would say, excuse me, one thing he would say a lot back then, he was always, even Luis Silva, songwriter, may he rest in peace also.
absolutely.
The songs have to have hooks. That
Yep.
was his thing. The hook. Does it have a hook? A hook. So when he was talking to me in this club, that's one thing he said. He said, "Congratulations, Un Momento album." He goes, the songs have good hooks. He said, and that's what the songs need to have if they're gonna hit, is they got to have good hooks in them. And which is true, because meaning by that, for those people who don't know what that means, is just something's gonna grab you in a song.
It's
a
got to be
little
catchy.
a musical line, or maybe a phrase in a song. Somebody, just a little phrase. That's the hook of the song. So
And
those are the things that make hits.
I remember I was talking to somebody when I was first kind of starting to do some recording and producing myself, and I showed this individual who had his own record label. I showed him some of the material, and he kind of, like, I felt discouraged because he said, "Hey, that song doesn't have a hook." He's like, "I already listened to so much of it and it doesn't have a hook," and so I felt kind of beat up and whatever, right? But against his advice, we released the song, and it did really well for the band that I was with at that time. And the thing is that the to him, he was listening for like a musical hook, and that's why I bring it up, is because music doesn't necessarily have to have a lyrical hook, right? It doesn't have to be like, oh, the word that like charanga or something, where you hear charanga and that's it could be something that's a musical hook, like you were saying. For example, right? That's right
Right.
there what catches the people. But as opposed to, like, how we were talking about Te voy a enseñar a querer, to me the hook was in that Te voy a enseñar a querer, a vivir, a sentirme, that, repeating that motif, that phrase, that melodic and rhythmic
Right.
sort of da 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 da, that syncopation kind of like really, like, it hooks you, you know what I mean? And so
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, that album was full of a lot of great tunes, and I think it was because of that. It was because of the hooks.
Yeah. Let me tell you a quick story about that. Back then in the '80s, when I was with Gary, we used to go to Lubbock, and every time we went to Lubbock, oh man, it was just terrible, because it was. I mean, we would be playing for the tables and the chairs. For some reason, it was hard to get Lubbock to come out to see us.
Mm-hmm.
So then the Un Momento album came out, and it had 4 songs on the big radio station in Lubbock. I forget what it is, 106 something power or whatever. Okay, well, on that station, 4 songs from the Un Momento album made the top 10
That's
during that
awesome.
time. 4 songs. So then all of a sudden, here we are. We're getting together, and we say, okay, where we going? He goes, we're going to Lubbock. Oh man, I'm like, oh man, it's gonna suck. Lubbock? Why the hell we going to Lubbock, man? We already gone 3 or 4 times, man. Tronamos every time.
Uh,
But anyway, so we go to Lubbock, and man, let me tell you, that place was jam packed.
wow.
You couldn't even walk in that place. But it was because of the Un Momento album. That album really hit back then. And like I said, 4 songs were on the top 10. So I mean, they were really pushing. And that's the thing, you got to brainwash the people on the air. You got to drive that music. You got to push it, and that's what it takes to draw the people into the arenas.
So I
But
have
yeah, that's a little story back then of what happened with that Un Momento album.
So I have a question in regards to that, but before I get into the question, because I know it's going to get lengthy, probably, once we dive into the conversation, right? I want to send a shout out going out to John Cruz, who says, "Hey fellas, do you guys remember the magazine Keyboard Magazine? I used to love reading it back in the days, especially with all the new keyboards and technology that was coming out back at that time. Yeah, that was a cool, magazine. I think they might still kind of be around in some kind of digital format now. If not, there's plenty of stuff on the internet, different resources where I mean, even YouTube people do, reviews, and you could see all the latest technology, and it's kind of, I think, in a way, for better for worse, the internet has really changed a lot of the industry because, I mean, for example, you can read the specs of a keyboard and you can look at pictures, right? But you can't really hear what it sounds like. They can describe it to you, right? But now that you have like YouTube and different technologies, where people can record some of these samples and you can listen to them in real time, that's kind of an interesting way that I feel that the internet has kind of helped, keyboardists and even, I guess, maybe not the publication, Keyboard Magazine, but, similar ones that are trying to keep up with the technology. Also, Chris Rodriguez says, they have a couple of Super JX10s on eBay, but they are super expensive, he says. So,
Hey, I would say even though it's an old keyboard, but let me tell you, that's a bad baby right there, the Super JX10. It's
oh,
got some nice sounds in it.
of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Roland has always been known for, their sounds, and, they've always been, kind of top of the line, along with Korg and Ensoniq and Kurzweil, and, Ensoniq isn't around anymore, which is unfortunate because they produce some decent gear. So
Hmm.
here's my question that I had. Okay, so you were talking about Gary Hobbs, obviously now legendary artist within our Chicano Tejano music industry. And at that time, like you said, it was kind of a struggle to get people to come out and support, right? But it wasn't till that breakthrough album when you said there was four songs that were playing on the radio, and I think the term you used was brainwash, right? You have to brainwash the people and say, hey, this is the hit, this is the hit, this is the hit. Do you think that the collapse of terrestrial radio has kind of led Tejano music astray? Like in a sense, like when you're on the radio, right, like that's the authority, like people listen to the radio and that's where you listen to the hits, right? That's where what lo que está pegando ahorita, right? But with the
Hmm.
collapse of terrestrial radio and everybody switching to internet, do you think that that's maybe one of the reasons why Tejano music has kind of like, I don't want to use the word fizzled out or whatever, right? But it's definitely not what it used to be back in the heyday, like when you were around, working with those artists.
Well, that's not one of the reasons. That is the reason,
Mm-hmm.
and I can tell you exactly. Back in the '90s, I was living in the Houston area. I had already quit playing. I got married and I got a real job. I was working at a refinery.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I would listen to the radio. I'd turn on the radio. Kakukuka,
Mm-hmm.
Houston, the largest Tejano station anywhere. Kakukuka was the Tejano station. And 106.5. I used to listen to them. One day I get in my truck because I drove a truck in the refinery, turn on the radio, and I hear this song playing that's not in their normal playlist. It was like some ballad de Mexico or something, And I was like, wow. I said, well, okay. So I said, okay. Then another song comes on, and it's more like pop, rock, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's weird. Why are they playing this stuff, And then they come back on the third song, and it's Mexico. I mean, it's like, banda,
Banda,
whatever.
yeah.
And I'm like, what's going on here? And then they went to commercial. Para todos ustedes que se expresan de così, così. I mean, and it was like, wait a minute. I said, something's wrong here. This is not their format. What's going on here? Well, no, Kakukuka was gone from one day to the next. No,
Wow.
no.
Notice.
Hey, we're gonna be going off air next week. Nada. It's just from one day to the next, gone.
Oh.
That right there was, if you can say, the beginning of slowly the end.
Hmm.
But so with that radio station gone, oh, and then right after that, in Houston, you used to have Lord Jim's, Studio 54, uh, all kind. There was like four or five major clubs where all the bands used to play, and on any given weekend, you could have all these bands at one time on the same day on a Saturday. You could have Mas one place, David Ligarza, Gary Hobbs, Ram Herrera, whatever, and all of the places would be jam packed.
Hmm.
That's how good the industry was back then. But once that radio station closed down, little by little, these clubs started shutting down.
Hmm.
You know, and then now it's like to where if there's two bands playing in Houston, everybody's like, oh man, who's gonna have the bigger crowd? Because it's not, it's
Yeah.
competition now. One's gonna have, or is the crowd gonna split, or is
Hmm.
they all gonna go?
Hmm.
It's not like where there was worries. There was no worries back then. You knew you were gonna have a packed house. It doesn't matter if you have four other bands playing in the same city.
There was enough people to go
But
around for
there was
everybody.
enough people to go around. But I would say that the radio, of course, had a lot to do with that. So once Kakukuka was gone, how are the people going to know what's going on in the town? Who's playing?
Hmm.
So that was just the begin. To me, that was the beginning of the end right there when Kakukuka shut down just like that without even a word or anything. From that point, things really just started taking a slow nosedive.
Hmm.
So
Now, so let's kind of jump back a little bit in the timeline because you said this is when you stopped playing music. Obviously, we kind of skipped from Gary to that situation where you started a family and stuff. But along the way, there was some other memorable things. Obviously, your time with Los Musicales, David Ligarza, and them.
Well,
So,
I played with Mas. I played with Mas also in
oh,
the '80s.
oh,
In
okay,
when I joined Gary, I was with Gary for a while, and then I went then I joined Mas. I was with Mas for a couple of years,
mhm. Was that
and
before or before
two
Brando, or?
two keyboard Brando and I two keyboards.
Oh,
We were
okay,
two keyboards. Yeah,
okay.
because this was a time when Mas first broke up and
Hmm.
the Force went on their own,
Yep.
or the whole band they started the Force. There were some musical chairs going on back then. This is what happened. Moss broke. Yeah, this is what happened. Moss broke up,
Hmm.
and the Force went on their own, right?
Yes.
Now, at the time, we had a band in Robstown called Cielo, and we had a singer with us, Paul Garza,
Mhm.
who sang for Showband USA,
Yep.
which I used to play with Showband USA back in the day too. I recorded an album with them. Well, at one point, Paul Garza, the singer for Showband, came to be with us with Cielo.
Hmm.
So when the Force went on their own, they took our singer from Cielo,
Hmm.
Paul Garza.
Yep.
So Paul Garza went to, but before that, Gary was singing with the Force
Gotcha.
because Brando went with Mas. Our singer Paul Garza went with the Force, and I went with Gary. So you see how that played?
Yep. Yep.
That's how that happened. There was some musical chairs that went on there like that.
Yeah.
Uh, but from the very beginning, also, I used to run into Brando at the mall in Eagle Pass, and he would ask me all the time, "Hey man, come and join us." Because their bosses always had two keyboard players.
Hmm.
The Force, it was two keyboard players.
Right.
So when Brando got in, uh, that was great that he was there, but I guess they wanted another keyboardist too. They wanted to get back to kind of what they had.
Hmm.
And they asked me from the beginning too, but I had already committed myself to Gary, at that time, and I just didn't feel. Uh, I had a little sense of uh, what do you call it, loyalty or commitment to what I do when I do something. So I gave that some time. So I was with Gary for about a year, and then eventually I wound up getting it with Mas also, and then I came back to Gary, you know. But then after that, also I played with Ram Atlanta for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then with David Lee for about 5 years. Yeah,
Now,
so
I saw in a recent interview. I know that I've mentioned that interview show here before. PVT, Professional Valley Talk with Rock and Roll James at Chavarria,
uh-huh.
and they were interviewing David Lee and Gilbert Velasquez together, and they asked David
hmm
Lee like, so which do you think is what's your favorite album of all time that you've put out? And he said, well, I guess if I really had to, put it on one, he goes, it'd be 1392, which we were talking beforehand that you did some work on that. What was your
hmm
hand in the making of that album? Was it just strictly performance, or did you have some arrangement ideas? Did you produce anything? What exactly did you contribute to that album?
Well, the good thing with David working with those musicales is that they let everybody have input in the arrangements. Sometimes there's a lot of groups that they don't really allow that. Maybe there's a certain person, a leader of the group or whatever, that just wants to take control of that. And if you join in a band, well, of course you're going to play what they already have in place. Any albums that have been out, you're going to play those songs.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to making new music, new material, he was pretty good in just letting everybody have input and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I had some ideas. Los de nosotros se acabó. Some of those arrangements were my ideas. Um, just like say that one song uh, in the Silver Edition album with Marcos Orozco.
Mm-hmm.
There's that song that Si te
Yeah,
quiero,
te quiero.
and then it has a little hit. Si te quiero, it has a little
Yeah,
hit like that.
yeah,
That was O. There's an O and W. Number
yeah.
76. Number 76. Return lead. Anyway, uh, but actually, that right there, I think I probably fed off of Adam, the drummer, because when we're rehearsing these songs for the album, we have a rehearsal. So we're just we're just going through the songs and we're just kind of feeling them out, and things are forming. And I think maybe at that one, if we see te quiero, I think Adam might have gone. Sometimes the drummers have these, have these little hits that they put.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I just fed off of Adam, and then the next time around, like he did it again. So then I decided to jump on that. And si te quiero, so I accented that with him.
That's cool.
So it's funny how something like that just feeding off of each other, and then before you know it, it's a signature part of the song. You hear si te quiero, now it's stamped into the song.
So I have a
But
question going back to 1392, okay? And
hmm
I like to listen to a lot of music. So Una Eternidad, right?
hmm
I told my wife, we were sitting there listening to the song one day. I'm like, that intro sounds like the American Music Award theme song. And yeah, da da
yeah.
da 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 da. So was that intentional, or was that like somebody's idea? Am I on the right path? Did somebody's like, hey man, I got this idea, and maybe that came from that, or was that just a coincidence that it happened to be like that?
It just happened like that. I want to say yeah, that was my idea. Wowie, I don't know. I think we were talking about the Academy Awards, and we were kind of singing da da da, and it was kind of floating around. So I said, hey, well, let's just use it in the song, da 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 da, da,
So then it was intentional then. Okay, cool. Hey, you see,
Sometimes just things off the wall, just whatever, they just kind of pop up like that.
so
Oh, Like also, well, keep going back to, I know we're talking about 1392, but you remember a group called Quemado
Oh yeah,
from Cork?
absolutely. Yeah.
So the guitars,
Joe
okay, Chi
Carmona.
Buga,
Yeah.
Wahoo, yeah. Well, they should do the like, so that's what Chief did in that song.
Hmm.
Si te quiero, it starts with that was a little Quemado riff there at the
Yeah,
beginning,
from I think Camelo used it on Hoy Soy Feliz, the tune that everybody
Right,
knows that Jay did, but Camelo did it
right,
first. Mi
uh-huh,
mundo no es el mismo, mi vida ya no es igual.
right, right,
All
yeah.
that, I mean that sound or yep.
Yeah,
So
and it's just a little riff from Quemado,
yeah.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
borrowing, right? A little bit of this, a little bit of that. You kind of make it
Yeah,
your own, and
well, yeah, that's how that happened, But most of the time, yeah, we all have influences when it comes to arranging, and that's a good thing I liked about David is that he allowed everybody to just have pitch in their own ideas, and a lot of times they just happened as we're playing. We're going over a song and we're practicing it over and over, and then as we're practicing it, people add little touches, this and that, and we feed off of each other, and then next thing you know, it just kind of comes together. So
yep.
it's a
And
team effort also.
that Silver Edition had a lot of great songs on it too. Te Juro Corazón and what was the other one? Te Quiero Mi Amor. You know which one I liked off of
Mhm.
that one was when Billy sang Paloma Loca. I liked that
Oh
one.
yeah, yeah,
That was on that. I know that one was on that album. Even the polkas that were on there. I mean, that was just a really good album. I mean, just you know, looking back on it, and yeah, that was. I remember when that album first came out, and I was expecting, because I was from the Midwest. I didn't. I was nowhere near Texas, but I would keep up with the music. And when I bought David Lee the Silver Edition, I put it in, and I was like, man, that doesn't sound like the same guy who sings, and back then I wasn't aware. I mean, I would read the credits and stuff, but I didn't know that Jay was doing it, going solo and none of that. I was just like, oh,
hmm
they got this new guy singing, and at first I was like, huh, kind of interesting, But and then it seemed like over time Marcos was the guy that, at least in my opinion, that had like the most successful run with Los Musicales, because a lot of guys were there for maybe a year or two, in and out, and then
hmm
but Marcos was there for a good long while, for at least
Yeah,
the better part of a decade, but you were
yeah.
only
He
there
was
for like the
he.
first part of it, right?
Yeah, when Marcos came in, he came from Los Fabulosos Cuatro,
Yep, absolutely.
and yeah, so he came in, and then which I'm glad because before that we had this guy. He never recorded with the band,
Mm.
but he also passed away some years
Mark,
back.
right?
His name, Mark Ortega.
Mark Ortega.
He Mark Ortega. That was after Jay was no longer there,
Hmm.
and we got Mark Ortega, and he was there for a little bit. He was in fact he was there for 3 months,
Hmm.
and uh, and then that's when we got Marcos
Hmm.
Orozco in the band.
Yeah, and then Marcos became full time. Yeah, and Marcos had
Yeah.
a lot of great songs too with Fabulosos, the Corazón a Corazón and all that stuff.
Uh huh.
The
Yeah.
Hinojosas were creating some good music back then too. The one thing about I believe Armando was the keyboard player, right? I forgot which one was
Ar-
which.
yeah. Armando
So
Hinojosa. Mando. Yeah.
yeah, he had that ASR 10 and Sonic brass, that pop brass, that
Mm-hmm.
the what people
Yeah.
nowadays associate with the Jerry brass. The Jerry de la Rosa used
Yeah.
to use it too and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
with you being in the industry like that, and being close with some of these colleagues and stuff like that, would you guys ever like trade ideas as far as like sounds, or would you guys ever ask questions to each other, or was it just back then you guys were always so busy on the road that there was really not a lot of time to have like out of band camaraderie? It was just kind of like, oh, we're playing with Los Fabulosos, and hey, how's it going? Okay, you guys are done and we're going up next, or you know um
The, yeah, pretty much back then it was like, well, back then when the industry was doing very well, we were playing 5, 6 nights a week. So You know, at any time we could be somewhere and you're playing with whoever, whatever other bands.
Mhm.
And really, yeah, most of the time, maybe you're just there at sound check and you're just, you know, you become good friends with other bands, other musicians. And just that little time that you have right there is when you can get together and talk. And mostly the conversations, maybe more, were like, oh yeah, man, last week we were here, there, and next, and we're going tomorrow. We're going to Florida, and you know, and it was just like what you've done and where you're going
Mhm.
and stuff like.
Yeah.
But yeah, not too much really talk about the
Music. Like
musical aspect of what
yeah.
you're doing with sounds and stuff like that, you
Mhm.
know. But
Yeah.
we're a little more personal, you know, of what
Yeah.
we're doing.
So
Well,
let me ask you this. I know before we went on the air, there were some things that you kind of wanted to touch about, some things that you kind of wanted to kind of shed some light on, at least from your perspective and stuff like that. I don't know if we've covered some of that or not, but I kind of wanted to open up the conversation to that because, believe it or not, we've already talked for an hour. and
okay.
and I mean, and there's really no time limit, here. But I want to kind of give you kind of like the floor here to kind of talk about some of the things that you said that we would talk about, and we kind of you know so we'll save it for the show. So here's kind of like the spot for that. If I don't know
Okay.
exactly how to segue into that, but if you want to kind of take the reins here and maybe strike up the conversation, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay. Yeah. I've had conversations with different people um, about this topic, about the word Tejano. Uh, Now, like we said, back in the days in the 60s, 70s, the word Tejano didn't exist. It was Chicano music,
Mm-hmm.
Chicano. So then, at some point, somewhere in the 80s, the word Tejano came around. Now, Tejano was started with with that onda, with Mas, Gary Hobbs, Pio Trevino, and which basically is to say keyboards, because right now we're having a conversation about keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
So the Tejano industry, the word Tejano came about because of keyboards. Now back then, a lot of groups didn't have keyboards. Like Mas, when I was back there with Mas, there was no accordion player back then. It was all keyboard. Gary, there was no accordion. Ram, for a good while, it was just all the only one that had an accordion was David Lee.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, and if David's listening or anybody, they can maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure at one point, Tejano keyboard was so strong and prevalent at that time that David Lee was more conjunto with the sax, more on the conjunto side or norteño side.
Yeah, kind of
But
like
me,
Roberto Pulido, kind of like
right,
accordion and sax.
right.
Yeah.
But I would say maybe at some point it had to cross their mind to where say, hey man, you know what, this, you know, we gotta do something because this industry is dominant
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have keyboards in our group. So they wound up getting a keyboard player. That's when they got Robert Ibarra,
Mm-hmm.
and he's the one who recorded the Con el Tiempo album.
Mm-hmm.
So even David Lee incorporated keyboards into, because that was Tejano.
Right.
That's Tejano.
Mm-hmm.
Keyboard keyboard is Tejano.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, but now through all this time, and then when Tejano music started taking a slow nosedive or whatever, uh, and you have all these other groups, and you have the Tejano Music Awards, but even that's changed because now they got all kind of groups, and not to take away anything from groups, because if you play conjunto norteño, whatever genre of music you play, that's fine. You know, I don't take anything away from people's talent and what they contribute, but I think there's still categories that we need to be separated from. So I feel, you know, certain groups that are in the Tejano Music Awards, or you call yourself Tejano, but to me, you need to change the name, just like it was Chicano, and then it became Tejano. Okay, we own that name, and I feel that I can say that because I consider myself a pioneer of that onda, of ushering that onda in.
Mm-hmm.
So as time has gone by, the word Tejano has been watered down a lot, I think. And there's a lot of groups that, okay, just because you're from Texas, that doesn't mean you're Tejano.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it's a style.
Right.
It's a genre, a genre of music,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So if say if you have a conjunto, well then be in the conjunto category or norteño or grupero, like there was that word grupero, right?
Mm-hmm. Or
Like
tropical,
límite,
grupero, yeah.
or like intocable and even signo and sólido and all that. Uh, to me that's those are separate categories,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I just feel I'm just a little prejudiced about Tejano because I know what Tejano is
Right.
when that word came out.
Right.
This is Tejano. Joe Posada, David Mares, Gary Hobbs, Jay Perez, David
Latin
Ligas
breed.
Musicales,
Yep.
Pio Trevino,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that style, that's Tejano music,
Right.
you know.
And
A lot of stuff outside the box to me is should be something else.
so let me ask you this, and I think that this is a good topic to have a good conversation to have, right? Uh, and this is from an outside perspective in because I've never lived in Texas. Well, no, I lived in Texas for like a month. I was doing some work down there with in San Antonio, but that's neither here nor there. I'm a Midwesterner. I was born in Michigan. My family has roots in the valley. I grew up listening to Pio Trevino, La Sombra, and of course Mas and La Mafia were staples, right? And then later on, the Jays, the David Lees, the Gary and Ram and all that, right? To me, and this is just my opinion, right? And maybe you might disagree, or maybe we actually kind of see eye to eye on this. I think that when it became Tejano music, the term marginalized the music in the sense that it's something that at the time it was just kind of like unique to Texas, right? But when you think of Chicano, I mean, people of brown skin, people who are mestizo, Mexican Americans, when you use the term Tejano, it's almost like they feel disconnected from that, as where Chicano was more inclusive to that onda, right? Because I mean, let's use the term Tejano as how we were referring to it on this channel, right? With like how you said, your Posadas, your J Perez, that's Tejano, right? What I'm getting at is that it's very Mexican American. It's Chicano at its like Chicano means Mexican American, right? It's not American per se because it's not in English, right? But it's also not Mexican because it's not mariachi or banda or whatever, right? Chicano, it's kind of like this gray area where it was like more inclusive. And to me, and like I said, this is no disrespect to anybody, but like say for example intocable or signo, right, or duelo or solido, that leans more on the more traditional Mexican side to me, if you ask me, right? But if you use the term tejano, at least for my opinion, uh based on like a geographical area, yeah, of course tejano means Texan, they're from Texas, whatever, right? Because like even within norteño, like if you start thinking about within the subgenres, like okay, if you say norteño, right, Ramon Ayala and Los Tigres del Norte are not the same, and neither is Intocable. Like they're different. It's kind of like when you say in broad strokes Tejano, right? Like you could say, well, Little Joe's Tejano, but also I don't know, Los Desperados or something. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something on the opposite side of the spectrum, right? And so when you start using broad strokes like that, it does kind of tend to muddy the waters. But in my opinion, and this is just my humble opinion, right? I think if we return back to the roots of calling it Chicano and kind of like being proud of that, that it's our little hodgepodge of American, a slice of American pie with tacos. You know what I mean? That's it's our own
Mm-hmm.
thing, you know, because Tejano, Texas, like there's country artists from Texas. George Strait is Tejano or whatever. You know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah.
but how do you feel about that? About
Yeah.
returning back to embracing the term Chicano
Yeah.
music?
Yeah. That's a good point. Maybe that's what we need to do is we need to go back to just say if you say
La
Chicano,
onda Chicana, right?
that means everybody. That
Yeah.
includes everybody. That's
Hmm.
everybody,
And
whether you're norteño, conjunto, tejano,
mhm,
or whatever. Or, yeah, it could be all inclusive.
mhm,
Uh, maybe that's what we need to get back to, like you said.
mhm.
You know.
But you know, and also like going back to you know, we were talking about jazz, and I know that I've said this on the channel before. Duke Ellington said it best. It says there's two kinds of music. There's good music, and there's the other kind. And so that's all subjective, right? And so like to me, like I was talking to Rick Fuentes when he was on a couple weeks ago. I play mariachi too to supplement my income because I'm a working musician. So of course Tejano's not going to pay the bills, but you know when I do that and I do mariachi and I do whatever gigs I can get my hands on, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that mariachi is I mean I like mariachi music, right? And even when I'm listening to music recreationally, like when I'm absorbing music, I'm not really listening like, hey, I'm listening to Tejano, or you know what I mean. It's like I listen to whatever, and if it strikes me good, whether it's banda, whether it's whatever, you know. And I mean, I know I'm saying banda, but you know, it's not my favorite genre of music. But one or two songs that might be, hey, that's got a nice hook to it, or you know, I could see, you know, the idea behind that, how it could, you know, translate well over to maybe a Tejano song or whatever, right? But what I'm saying is that maybe, and I know that sounds kind of contradictory because the name of my website is freaking TejanoKeyboard.com, you know. But I think that, you know, in a way, yes, labels are good because then you have some kind of a standard to say when you say Tejano or Chicano or whatever you want to call it. When you say this kind of music, you know what to expect, right? If you say it's this kind of music and then people are expecting something and they get something else, you know, that's where the line kind of gets, you know, watered down. But then the opposite, to play devil's advocate to that, right? It's like, who cares about labels, right? Like if it's good, people will like it or they won't. You know what I mean? And I found that interesting because when I was playing in my previous band, we did a couple tours to Florida, and when they're like, oh, they're Tejano, and so we would start playing, you know, our Tejano, you know, like, you know, a cover band and some originals, but you know, in the style of Mas and Jay and David Lee and stuff like that. And they just stared at us like, what are you guys playing? That's not Tejano. You know, to them, Tejano is Intocable, you know, Duelo, Pesado, you know what I mean? And so that was just interesting to me. But so maybe both sides are right. Like you said, maybe we do need some kind of like classification, some kind of something. I don't know. And, you know,
Yeah.
but I think you're absolutely right. When you start kind of like loosely using Tejano to categorize a bunch of stuff, then a lot of stuff kind of gets lost in the mix or watered down, or you know, as you were saying.
Hmm.
Um, real quick, I'm trying to catch up here because it seems like we kind of hit a hot button issue here because a lot of people are talking about it. So let's see here. John Cruz says progressive conjunto. That's what I've always called early DLG. What's up, Hector? So John Cruz says hello. Uh,
Hello.
John Cruz also says music is water nowadays. Look at country fusion, rock, rap, etc. It's not country anymore. And that, you know what, I saw a video. Somebody was talking about how they put finger snaps, like rap finger snaps, in country music now. And
Hmm.
I was like, I never paid attention to that, but I guess if you do listen to the country radio, like I guess that is something that's prevalent and very interesting. Chris Rodriguez says it's because you're talking about subgenres within one genre, like norteño regional versus norteño They dropped the regional and just left it as norteño, like with Intocable. Then it becomes norteño light. And he also goes on to say, same thing applies within the Tejano genre. You have orchestral, Tejano conjunto, and simply Tejano and subgenres, my friend. So he was talking about
Yeah.
within the subgenres, and that I've dealt with some people here in my studio that recorded a metal album, and like I'm like, oh, they play heavy metal. They're like, no, we play, and they were really specific about, like we're not black metal, we're not degent or whatever. I don't know how you say it, but they had their
Mhm.
real specific like kind of like, don't call us that. We're not that kind of metal. We're not Metallica.
Yeah.
We're like these
Yeah.
guys, and
Yeah.
so
You have acid rock and
yeah,
heavy metal and
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
there's the different styles within that also. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you really want to get into like say Tejano, right? Like the way that we were talking about, like with keyboards, onda music, whatever, right? Mas and La Mafia, they're like two different. That's like fire and ice. Those are two different things, at least to me, right? Like people are like, oh no, that's all on that. But like for people who really like want to dissect things, you know what I mean? Like the Houston sound was different from the Valley sound, and then the San Antonio sound sounds different from everything else. So this is a really
Speaking of that, back when I was with Mas back in the '80s, we actually had, I couldn't believe it, but it was a battle, like a battle of the bands. It was Mafia and Mas, and we played together here in Corpus
mm-hmm,
at the Coliseum.
mm-hmm,
They already tore that building down,
mm-hmm.
but they actually had Mas and La Mafia, and they were pushing it like who's better kind of thing, you know. I mean, I couldn't believe that. I said, well, okay. And then flipped a coin, and La Mafia went first, and then we went second, and then who knows what the outcome of that was? You know what I mean?
You're like, I
Hey,
got paid.
yeah, they
I
did their
won.
thing, and we did our thing, and hey, the business, you just do your own thing,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of music out there, and I give my hat off to take my hat off to all the musicians that are out there that are serious about what they're doing, whether it's you're going to play in your garage or whatever. But we all, if you have a love for music, you have a love for music that's going to be with you till the day you die. And there's people that don't know anything about music, but they love music. They're
Mm-hmm,
connoisseurs of music,
mm-hmm,
and they buy, they, well, now it's uploads, but they like this, and they go to the concerts, and because they really love music.
mm-hmm.
And then you have people like us, like me and you, that are actual musicians. So I appreciate all musicians, and I uplift everybody, and we're all, we can learn. Everybody can learn. You're never too good to learn, to stop learning. The best can learn from the least.
I agree with you.
Sometimes you could be a great musician, but then you might get with somebody that maybe just kind of starting out, or whatever, and you go, hey, what was that? I like what you did there. Everybody has something to offer.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely, and that's
so
something that we've
yeah.
talked about on this channel before. Is that like music is like an artistic expression, right? It's not like it's not to me. It's not a sport, with these like award ceremonies and stuff like that. Like, of course, it's nice to get accolades and say, "Hey, you did a great job. Here's an award for your, what you do." But on the reverse side of that, what tends to happen is that we fall into this kind of like web of resentment and friction sometimes because nobody wants to be the loser, right? And it's not about winning and losing. It's about creating something that's going to be timeless, something that's going to touch somebody's soul, somebody that's from my heart to your heart, something that's going to live on, and you can't put points on that. You score that and be like, oh, okay, well, Mas wins because this and this and this on the technicality, or La Mafia wins on the. I've never really understood that, you know what I mean? And so, like you said, whether somebody's first starting or somebody has had a lot of experience, if you always open your ears, there's always going to be room for growth. And I think that that's what's going to keep Tejano music going on into the future, is people trying to evolve it in a direction that's fresh, that's new, that somebody needs to come along and inject some life into our onda, I think. And I
Hmm.
think for the short time being, I know it re- uh, remains to be foreseen, right? Especially amid this pandemic and all this stuff that's going on. But I think that, for better for worse, the internet's going to be able to help us create better content, because people are going to be the ultimate judge of what's good and what's bad. We have another comment right here from Joe Cruz. It says, "Who came up with the term Tejano? It was a Caucasian, because back in the day we were called Chicano, and now we're called Hispanic. Who invented those words?" So he's probably venting a little bit, and you know what, and he's right to it. I feel, to an extent, you know what I mean. Like, some of these labels, I think, and I mean labels as in the word Tejano, right? But also labels within recording labels, right, or record companies. I think they were trying to find a way to market Chicano music without it, without it being so broad stroke, just like, hey, Mexican American music. So if you put it something that sounds more exotic, like Tejano or something like
Yeah.
that, maybe that's when that started coming along. And of course, TTMA kind of started the whole Tejano Music Awards thing, and so who knows? Maybe they.
Another example is the word reggaeton.
Mm-hmm,
When reggaeton came out, the word reggaeton never existed,
mm-hmm,
in the 80s, if
mm-hmm,
you want to say. But then they came up, which is reggae, but
mm-hmm.
then they mixed it with, that a little Latin,
Yeah,
whatever, mixed in with the
with the
reggae,
hip hop
and
and
then
everything.
now you have reggaeton, so the word reggaeton never existed, but now it is a genre of music, reggaeton. So maybe Tejano was that way too. When it came out, is because something influenced that name. You know.
And to piggyback off of that, I think the transition between Chicano music and Tejano is when they injected accordion with the keyboards. Like you said, when David Lee started getting keyboards with the accordion, or even Mas would get David Lee to record a couple songs, just a little bit of accordion here and there. But then they were like, hey man, this accordion thing's really like working for us. Then they got Frankie Caballero, and then they started like Mas from late '80s to now. It's like you can't see Mas without accordion. You know what I mean? As
Yeah,
where before
yeah,
that, that wasn't the norm. They
yeah.
would even play the accordion on the keyboards. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. Before the keyboard was dominant, and then somehow, as time went on, the accordion came back in, and then now everybody has. Gary has accordion, Mas, Jay Perez, whatever, all the artists, and now they want to, they have to have accordion in there now, So,
Yeah.
but that's because the accordion is what's dominant right now.
Yep. And I
So,
mean, let's be real here. Like, I know that with the technology that came, the keyboard was exciting because it could do all these sounds. But let's not forget where all this came from, right? It came from polkas and conjunto music, right? So like maybe the bloodline of the accordion has always been there. It just kind of faded a little bit, and then it's kind of like interweaving itself back into what we do. You know what I mean? Because I mean, look at our pioneers. Tony de la Rosa, even los Relámpagos. You were talking about los Alegres de Terán. You know, Isidro Lopez. I mean, we're talking about our roots, conjunto roots, you know what I mean, and
hmm
kind of incorporating today's modern technology and kind of trying to make it our own. We're trying to be ourselves in a world that marginalizes us to be either American or Mexican, and like it's hard to find our niche, in
it's
this
it's
world.
funny how it's funny how through the time this it's funny how that little simple rhythm has taken on so many different
It,
colors,
yep, absolutely. Well, even cumbia. Rick Fuentes, I know he was just on a few weeks ago, but we were talking. He was said, he goes, the guido is the most important thing in cumbia. He goes, you can't dance to a bass by itself or whatever. He goes, but that
Yeah.
he goes, you can dance to that, and it's interesting because I know you were talking about rancheras and polkas and stuff, but really, I mean, look at the cumbia. I mean, the evolution of cumbia within you know how the orquestas try to incorporate it, say like a Latin breed or something like that, to AJ Castillo now, who's got this whole tribal sort of cumbia thing going on. It's but we're making it our own, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying
Yeah.
to incorporate all this stuff and make it ours, right?
Hey, well, maybe they need to do a little skit like where they do and it's, hey, I need more Guido, more Guido. Like
Yeah, like the more
like
cowbell.
like
Yeah,
like like the Will Ferrell
like
cowboy
the Will
thing. I
Ferrell.
need
Yeah.
more Guido, more Guido.
You know what, Hector? It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been nice
Okay.
reliving a lot of in my mind, when all those albums that we're talking about came out. I was super young. I was in grade school, but to be able to, it's just kind of like relive in the moment. You go back to those songs and you can kind of remember where you were at and in life and all that. I appreciate the journey. I appreciate your time. I appreciate what
Sure
you've
thing.
done for La Onda Tejana, Chicano music, whatever you want to call it. I'm
Okay.
grateful for what you've done for our industry, and our doors are always open to you if you want to come on and do this again. Because I mean, there's only so much we could talk about in an hour, hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sure that you have plenty more to say, and it's just, you know, I don't want to keep you all night. I appreciate everybody who's been
No.
logging on and asking the questions. Thank you so much for continuing to do this. I want to give you guys a quick heads up because Hector here is the last one of the month. I still need to get the graphic done for next month, but let me pull this up here and I should remember it because I did the same thing last week. Let's see here. Tejano keyboard. Next week we have Michael Rodriguez from Bump Latino, followed by Rat Steve Silvas, Joe Reveles, and much, much more coming up in the month of August. Or rather, let's see, that was the month of July, and then going into August. So at the end of the month of July, I want to keep promoting this now, so you guys can know, and we'll put more graphics together. We're gonna do a tribute to Jerry De La Rosa. He passed away in 2007. But me being a fan of his, I want to kind of pay him homage. So we're reaching out to some people who are going to kind of join in on a conference sort of thing like this so we can do a live interview to talk about him. I reached out to his wife, Yvonne. She declined to be part of the interview. I guess that's not really her thing, but she did feel very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Happy that she's the word she used was speechless. That we're gonna pay homage to her late husband, who like Hector and many of these other guys, Brando and Joe Reveles, are guys who were really like monsters within the music that were really paved the way for music.
I worked with Jerry. I worked with Jerry.
Yeah.
With Gary Hobbs. He was playing bass with us with Gary Hobbs for a while. Yeah, he was playing bass. He was playing bass with us.
I'll have
And
to
then when I
remember
went to and then when I went to join David Lee Garza,
Mhm.
he jumped on the keyboards for Gary.
Yeah.
And then from there he went on with Jay.
Yep.
But I worked with Jerry for a couple of years. He's
Yeah.
a very excellent musician.
Yeah, and so I'll
Yeah.
have to remember to incorporate that into the stories and stuff. But for those of you who are watching during that interview, we're going to be talking to Chente Barrera and Gilbert Velasquez, two musicians who worked with him on the regular, in the studio and also with the Jay Perez band, and at least in its first incarnation. We may or may not maybe have another person who might join in and maybe say a few things about Jerry, but nonetheless, that'll be coming up at the end of next month in July. So be on the lookout for that. Other than that, thank you once again, Hector. If you want to stand by real quick, I'm going to sign off here for the remainder of the rest of you guys.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to see us here, same time, same place next week with Michael Rodriguez from Bump Latino. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.